This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 84 of Here's How for the 20th of May 2019. Last September, I talked to Dr. David Robert Grimes about the cervical check controversy. In this podcast, we'll hear from a group campaigning for the women affected.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Here's what we've got coming up for you in this podcast. If that's just the limitation of the test, what is the political option there?
My understanding would be that there hasn't been any settlements awarded that have not shown clear negligence.
That's coming up shortly, but first I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who does that. If you don't know, Patreon is basically a system that allows people to donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, and that helps me to devote more time to research and to finding interesting guests. It's totally voluntary, unlike some others. You won't get a criminal conviction if you choose not to contribute. But if you think that it is worthwhile to contribute, and you can do the same as the people who are doing that already, there's details on the website and at the end of the show. I wrote a piece on the website last December about Brexit with the title that might have sounded a little pessimistic. It was called "It's over, brace for catastrophe, there's no hope." At this point, I don't think that was pessimistic. I can't see any plausible way forward for the UK that does not lead to disaster, to further disaster. Nobody knows exactly what will happen, just like nobody knows exactly which cups and plates a bull in a china shop will smash, but we don't need to know those details to know that it isn't going to end well. It seems pretty clear now that Theresa May will be gone in a fortnight. The thing that will happen between now and then is what? The fourth doomed vote on her deal with the EU? No. Well, yes, that will happen, but it's not relevant, the outcome is certain, and it will change nothing. The thing that will happen between now and then is the European Parliament elections. This will have a much more profound impact on UK politics. We can see what's going on in the polls. At the time of writing, the Nigel Farage fan club, otherwise known as the Brexit Party, is a mile in front, with 35%. Back nearly 20 points come the Lib Dems on 16, then Labour on 15, then the Greens on 10. Have you worked out what's missing yet? Something not quite normal? Yes, behind them all, in fifth place, come the Conservatives with a whopping 9% of the vote. And it's not just the voters who are refusing to support the Conservative Party. 40% of Tory councillors have said that they will go against their own party in the Euros and vote for Farage instead. That's not just the Conservative Party members, it's Conservative members of local councils. Almost half of them are going to vote for a rival party. And within a week of that, the leader of the Conservatives is going to resign, and there must be a leadership contest. They have quite a smart way of electing a leader, I have to say. The Conservative MPs vote, and the top two candidates amongst MPs are sent then to a ballot of the party rank and file. This is to give the party members a say in the leader, but prevent the crazy situation of electing someone who the vast majority of MPs disagree with Jeremy Corbyn. And those MPs selecting the two candidates to put to the membership will be doing it while they're poring over their local European election results, where they'll see that if it were repeated in a general election, the Conservative Party would win about 0 seats. And they will see their voters and their members and even their councillors defecting in droves to the Brexit Party. That will have a profound impact on the way they vote. There is no chance in hell that one of those two candidates will not be a hardline Brexiteer. In all likelihood, both of them will be hardline Brexiteers. And if you look at the membership of the Conservative Party, it's much more in favour of a hard Brexit than the party MPs, certainly much, much more so than the wider population. And all those people have been telling themselves for months that only for Theresa May they would have stomped off to Brussels and wagged their chubby little fingers at Johnny Foreigner and said, "Listen here, chaps," and that evil Barnier would have been rumbled and would have given the British everything they want. And that sounds like the fantasy of a dying empire, because that's exactly what it is. The nature of the electoral process within the Tory party is such that it is certain to return the most extreme of Brexiteers, the least realistic, the least thoughtful about the consequences of their actions. That is, as I said before, probably also the one with the worst haircut, although that almost doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore because whoever gets the job will be in an utterly changed political environment. We can talk about it now, but the effects won't be felt until it arrives, and when it arrives, it will change everything. Nigel Farage's Brexit Party getting anything like a third of the vote will simply upend the entire political landscape in the UK. Remainers may well point out that if you add up the votes of the strongly anti-Brexit parties, the Lib Dems and the Greens together make 26%. Add in Change UK, that's 31%, and throw in the SNP and Plaid Cymru and the Save the Kidderminster Hospital Party, that puts them marginally ahead of the Brexit Party, but it doesn't matter. The bottom line is the shift of Conservative and to a lesser extent Labour voters in droves to a party that's a month old. That will force the new Conservative leader into a position where, for domestic political reasons, they must demand from the EU concessions that simply can't be made. Buckle in for a crash-out Brexit.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have Danny McCabe. Danny is a member of the steering group of an organisation called Standing for Women. Danny, tell me essentially where that organisation comes from and what you're doing.
Hi, William. Standing for Women came about this time last year. We've actually just passed our year mark. It was in response to the cervical check scandal when it first broke. Our founder, her name is Anne Corkery. She's a secondary school teacher in Dublin, and she was driving home from work, heard Stephen Teep on the radio, on I think it was the Ray Darcy show, speaking about his wife Irene's death. And she was so moved by hearing him speak that she went home, she started a Facebook group, and within days, the Facebook group was the intention for the women and people of Ireland to come together to do something about another scandal to do with what might be considered traditionally women's healthcare.
For the people who weren't paying attention, what exactly was the scandal as you see it?
The scandal as I see it was really out of nowhere. You know, it hit the news kind of a couple of weeks before the Repeal the AIDS referendum that a woman called Vicky Phelan, who's a bit of a household name now, had her smear test misread in previous years, and instead of the low-grade abnormalities that she was told she had, there actually had been cancer on slides that were misread. So she should have had intervention with her treatment much earlier than she did. And then we found out from there that she'd been in a court case for a number of months, if not longer. And it was only for the fact that she won the court case that she waived her that she was able to speak about it publicly, and that's what broke the scandal. So it was this woman really that broke the scandal to let us all know that that this had happened, and that it wasn't just Vicky. It was much more than that. The numbers rose over the days to be, 221 different people that were affected.
To give people maybe just a bit of a kind of technical background on that, this is to detect early stages or precancerous stages of cervical cancer in women. There's what's known as a smear test, which takes some cells from the woman's cervix, which are then examined in various ways, including by eye, that a series of cells are essentially looked at by someone who's supposed to be expert at doing that, in order to determine whether those cells contain indications that the woman may have or may in the near future develop cervical cancer. And with Vicky Phelan and a significant number of other women, their slides were read as being negative. That's to say, they were determined not to have anything wrong.
It was either negative or low grade abnormalities, so that there were cell changes there. But in Ireland, we have a system that if you have cell changes and they're under a certain level, you kind of come back in 6 months, or you come back in a year, or you're not sent straight in for it to be escalated to see the extent. It's not too bad. Come back later, Joe. It's not actually cancer. It's a precursor. Let's keep an eye, but you don't have cancer. Whereas in fact, in a lot of cases, these women did have cancer then. Okay.
And as you see it, in terms of the HSE and at a political level, what went wrong?
Oh, okay. How long do you have? I think the biggest thing, I suppose, is that the people that I've spoken to that are directly impacted, obviously something went wrong in how they, in whatever way whatever packages they went for when they decided what standard of testing will be done on the smear tests of the people and the women of Ireland. Whatever, because there's a huge misconception that this all happened in America. There's a massive misconception that this was all one particular lab in the States, and it wasn't. A number of the misreads actually happened in Irish labs as well. So it's across the board an issue that must be to do with testing quality. It must be. There's obviously Dr. Scally has done an extensive report in Quest in the States, and he's doing more investigation now. So hopefully soon we'll get that report and we can learn more. But it was definitely a failure in Emma Vic-Fahuna used to have a great way of explaining it, that it was death by cutbacks, that it was saving money and watching pennies at the extent that it's cost people their lives. So that's obviously, that's definitely up first. There's your problem. Then there is, when the government and the HSE realised it was a problem, realised that, through audits that actually the tests aren't right, there's a problem. They failed to inform the people whose tests were incorrect of their health, of what had happened in their healthcare. They took that from them. They withheld it.
Roll back on that, Danny, there for a second. When you say failed to inform the people whose tests were incorrect, women get this test after a certain age. They get it at set intervals. And there were cases, am I correct, that at one particular smear test, a woman was found to have a relatively advanced case of cancer, and that had been missed on previous smear tests. Is that what you're saying about that?
That wouldn't be the minority of cases. That would be a massive amount of the cases in the situation of the women of the 221. Many of the women had extensive cancer that should have been detected much earlier.
Okay.
That had, they had to have radical hysterectomies and, extreme surgeries that they never should have had to have if it had been detected on time. Extensive treatments. Women passed away because the time. We know with illness, we know with cancer, time is everything.
Yeah.
If you're taking time away from people, especially with cervical cancer, because yes, it's a slow grower, but once it kind of gets its feet, it's very quick. And
also, we should say that in the recent weeks, a woman called Ruth Morrissey, who tragically is terminally ill, was awarded €2.1 million in the High Court as damages following the misreading of her earlier smear tests. That is, as I understand it, essentially a compensation for apparent incompetence in the reading. Am I right on that?
Yes. So I'm trying to think of the wording. I'm pretty sure that they have admitted in some form that there was negligence. I think the majority of the damages were awarded because of the failure to disclose. I don't think they've released the full details of the breakdown, and they probably won't. But it is, I know the lab are appealing it, which is vile. Because at the end of the day, 2.1 million, it's a huge amount of money, but it's not going to tuck our kids in at night.
Yes.
And there's absolutely no amount of money that can replace a human being. There's just none. And Ruth was dragged through the courts for months and months and months and months after so many promises from the Dáil that none of the women would have to go to court, and they have. They did. They still are. There's so many active cases going on that aren't in the press and aren't in the media because, of course, people are entitled to their privacy. But they're all equally going through such turmoil trying to get a little bit of justice and accountability, which should not be that hard. People should not be being put through this as they are. And, you know, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Like the 221 are the first round of people that we know this has affected. There are more coming. You know, the second wave hasn't hit yet, but it is coming. You know, there's 1,702 smears waiting to be audited to see how many of them is there negligence, how many of them are misreads. And, you know, some of the women that those smears, you know, would have belonged to have already passed away.
What I want to do then, Danny, is I just want to play a very short excerpt from podcast number 79, which we did last September with David Robert Grimes. He is a cancer researcher, and I asked him about this, and I just want to play a short excerpt of that.
The problem was about disclosure. There's always going to be disagreement. So there'll always be, you know, potential cancers missed, potential markers missed. That we know that's unavoidable, right? So when you are diagnosed with cancer, if you're a woman and you get a diagnosis of cervical cancer, we do a thing called an audit. So we go back through your previous smears. And with that hindsight, we go, is there anything in this cytology, in this mess of cells, that I might have interpreted differently, or we might have graded differently, knowing that the patient ultimately got cancer?
What's the purpose of doing that?
Quality control. We're constantly trying to make it better. We're like, oh yeah,
we missed something. What should we have missed? That's for the benefit of essentially future recipients of the screening.
Absolutely. And it's also to make sure, it's also for quality assurance. So you go through and go, okay, you know, if you went back and there was a really obvious one that was missed, then someone should go, hey, what's going on here? The idea is to keep the program consistent. And we've done quite well on that. I mean, it comes out well in the Scally report.
That was Dr. David Robert Grimes. And the one point that he was making there was that this is a very inexact science, and it's not on or off. It's a very fine judgment, and it's entirely proper when somebody gets cancer that hasn't been picked up to go back and to audit to see the previous smear tests to see can they improve the process. Would you accept that?
No. I mean, I definitely think we need to do more audits, but I don't agree. What he's speaking to is hindsight bias. He's speaking that a lot of and I'm not saying, maybe he's not, obviously I haven't heard the whole interview, maybe he's not, but it sounds like he is speaking to what a lot of different researchers, a lot of different doctors, radio hosts, the whole shebang keep going on. This is hindsight bias and it's all about disclosure, that's the biggest problem here. It's not just about disclosure. There is negligence in some of these smears, not all of them, but in some of these smears, it is outside the scope for the failing of screening. It's outside the scope. They wouldn't be doing huge settlement fees of 2.1, 2 million, 7.5 million if there wasn't more there. Like the court cases, you know, there's experts investigating these, and you wouldn't, like, all you have to do is listen to an interview with Vicky Phelan or Stephen Teep or Lorraine Walsh and listen to them explain this part of it. And it's so clear, but you've got people that are experts that are going, no, it's just hindsight bias. Sure, if you know it's there, of course you're going to spot it. Knowing that the cancer is there doesn't necessarily automatically mean that there was a negligence in the first place. Which is almost putting a bias against it.
That's true, but it doesn't automatically mean that there was negligence either.
But there isn't. But there's both, is what I'm saying. Like nobody is saying that every single smear that gets audited is going to come up as negligence. Nobody has said that from the beginning, and it's a massive misconception. And it's really just kind of dismissiveness, really, at this point. I've read articles that really, I suppose, respected journalists are kind of saying the same thing, and it's just brushing it all up into one big mess that people aren't going to sift through to find the facts.
Okay.
Nobody has
you said one thing there, Danny. You said one thing there, Danny, that why would there be such large settlements of multi-million euro settlements? Can I suggest one reason that politicians are running scared? And there's one thing that you mentioned in your own literature that you sent me very kindly about how the audit was promised in a particular time frame which has not been met, and in addition that the attempt to meet that is meaning that other smear tests are being delayed. Politicians are running scared of a political backlash, of a public opinion backlash, because quite rightly people have huge sympathy with any woman, with young children particularly, who's dying much earlier than they should, and explaining that although it is tragic, it is not the responsibility of the HSE. That's just politically impossible, and they're paying out money as a result.
I would disagree. There's plenty of experts that are doing the work here to find the negligence. If there's negligence there, it should be paid for.
Nobody disagrees with that. But if there's not negligence, if that's just the limitation of the test, what is the political option there?
My understanding would be that there hasn't been any settlements awarded that have not shown clear negligence.
Okay. Clearly, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a legal expert. I understand that you're not either, although you're very involved in the group. So, neither you nor I are in a position to make a professional judgment on that. But
I'm literally only going off on my own experience of who I've spoken to, about I don't mean that in a blanket statement. Definitely none have happened.
Sure. I'll ask you then, Danny, to do something that probably you're going to find very difficult, which is to have sympathy for a politician. So if a politician who's, looking for votes to get elected in the next election, if they want to keep their job, is in a position whereby they're being told that this woman is going to be on every chat show and has an incredibly heartbreaking story to tell, but it is not a bona fide case of negligence. It's just a tragedy that is a tragedy. You're not in a position to fight that person in the courts, are you?
I don't know. To be honest, that's a tough one. I think that's I understand where you're coming from. You're sitting there and you're saying, this could be a case, but at the end of the day, it's a hypothetical. And to be honest, it's not a very helpful hypothetical, because it really takes away in the public perception. There's so much misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. It takes away from the public understanding of the real facts of the case, that there is negligence going on. And there's so many of the women that have been dismissed publicly, that have been targeted publicly, saying that they're going to ruin the screening program, that they're, that they're going to make more women not go for their smears because of the fact they're highlighting this so much, which is really unhelpful and it's unfair. So I'm not going to get into that. Mm-hmm. But I do have sympathy though for our politicians. I do have sympathy for our officials that are actively trying to do something about this. My issue with our politicians is that, in my own experience working on this for the last year, is that there is a huge amount of apathy. There is a huge amount of sound bites about it, but they don't actually educate themselves on what the issue is and what the ongoing issue is. The amount of different local representatives that I have spoken to over the last year that don't even understand about the 1,702 smears still left to be audited, that don't even understand that it wasn't just Quest in America. We need our officials to educate themselves in this issue so they can represent us wholeheartedly, and that we can trust that they know what they're doing about it. You know, it took us 5 months to get 28 councils in Ireland to pass a motion in regards to the cervical check scandal. 5 months of really hard lobbying of people all over the country lobbying
So
their local
what you've been
councillors.
doing is lobbying local authorities in order to get them to pass a motion essentially in your support. That may be a public relations move, but it doesn't have any legal effect, does it?
Well, it's our motivations with it was that they'd write to the Minister for Health on our behalf, and we could try and progress what we do think are, you know, really key issues of the scandal, because there hasn't been movement on them. So it is about, you know, unity and support in our local representatives, joining with grassroots groups, coming together to say to, you know, to say to the Dáil, like, this is where we're at. This is what we want. Please come and engage with us. Please come and tell us what's going on here. Please stop with this trickling of information. Show us what's being done. You know, show us
one thing that I think
changing.
stood out, and which when I was talking to David Robert Grimes, although I would trust him on his science, I'm not so sure about the public relations, and there were comments that really make the hair on your neck stand up, whereby women were just treated incredibly dismissively by doctors that wouldn't have given you any faith in anything that they had done. Where do you think that's coming from?
I mean, that's still happening, William. That's still happening. I know several members of the 221 that are in treatment that you know, feel very much so that there's a tension and there's a disdain from their health practitioners because they're victims of a scandal. That they feel, you know, if they, you know, a lot of the women, it was actually in the Scally report, it was detailed very well. Dr. Scally did a great job of detailing this part. He detailed the almost blame that some women got when they met with their consultants to speak about the scandal, to ask what happened, that it was like this kind of washing of the hands, this isn't my fault, and really being punitive towards them for wanting answers and for wanting to know, could their lives have been different? Could you imagine, you know, having an extensive cancer, having a terminal diagnosis, and somebody turning around to you and saying, actually, you never should have had cancer at all. You're first being put with the torturous wonder of what if. What if? That is literally torture. And going to your consultant, going to your health practitioners to try and get some sort of, you know, is this the case? And being met in such a punitive manner. That's horrific. You know, one woman was told when she had to have extensive surgeries, and she was in her late 40s at the time, and her consultant basically turned around to her and said, oh, well, we just would have whipped it all out anyway. Sure, you've lived your life, you've had your kids. Late 40s. I mean, the type of surgeries, you know, it affects their sex life. It affects their everything to do with
highly
their bodies.
invasive.
It's hormonal, like super invasive surgeries. I had no idea the surgeries were that invasive until I sat down with some of these women and had this conversation. I had no idea. And there's a consultant sitting in front of someone and going, we just would have whipped it out anyway. You're old, your life is over.
Looking at the case of Ruth Morrissey that was in the courts recently, that is being appealed by the US laboratory that was the subject of most of the damages in that. And one of the comments that's been made on that is that if they don't overturn this puts the entire cervical smear program at risk, because they just can't take the risk, because it's going to always be the case that they miss some. And just, I don't want you to necessarily comment on that directly, but as a thought experiment, if you have a screening program that can find 80% of a particular cancer, that means that 20% of it goes not found. If then those 20% can sue, then a rational response to that is to say, well, we're not going to get involved in that at all. Isn't there that danger?
No, because there's a key step missing in that argument. That argument would be based on the standard of testing from Ruth's case, from Vicky's case, from all the women from this scandal's case being the same as it is going forward. Once it all came out, like the difference is the government didn't necessarily know where the failures were when all this was going on. Now they do. So we know that they're actively, we don't know exactly what the specifics are. We've been asking for them. We haven't gotten them, but they have assured the country that and Dr. Scally did assure in his report that he is satisfied with the current quality of testing in the likes of Quest over in the States. So that's different to what it was when this scandal, when all the negligence did actually occur.
Okay,
so how can you be afraid?
You think that the error rate now is significantly lower?
Obviously, I can't say that as a fact, but we've been reassured through reports that there has been extensive measures taken to ensure that it won't occur again.
Okay.
So
the nature of this is that there will always be some error rate. And if that error rate produces people who then have the right to go to court and sue and say, you missed my cancer, then that does have the potential to close down the entire thing.
But keep in mind, it's not you missed my cancer. It was their negligence when you were testing for my cancer. That's the big difference. It's been confirmed that there was negligence in Ruth's case. That's been confirmed.
By?
In her court case.
Okay, but by whom? By the outcome, which is under appeal.
Of course it's under appeal, but the thing is that we don't have the court data. We don't have the court notes. We don't know. The reason they could be appealing could be over really specific language in having to take accountability. It might not necessarily have to be because of what everyone thinks it is. We don't have access to that information. It's all speculating, and it's unhelpful speculating. Hypotheticals when people are suffering and are being ignored in their suffering are unhelpful.
Okay.
We need to get to the root of the information, spread across the accurate information and go from a place of knowledge and not go from a place of speculating and fear mongering. And that is what's happening here. It is pure scaremongering that cervical check is going to disappear because of these court cases. There is a steering committee made up of incredible people that are working very hard to improve cervical check. There has been an uptake in smear testings of over double the percentage or something really massively high because of the awareness of this. The HPV vaccine is up because of the awareness of this. This scandal has done horrific damage and nothing will ever change that. But the people that have been impacted by this scandal have done amazing, amazing things to make people aware of their health, of their rights and how they need to take care of themselves and engage with screening process. Women and people weren't accessing the screening programs like they are now before this scandal. I'm not saying the scandal is a good thing. It definitely isn't. It will never be a good thing. But the likes of Vicky going on the Late Late Show or Lorraine or Stephen going on the radio, and even women that I'm in touch with, they've done radio in their local areas. They're organising to go to local schools about it. Those people taking this tragedy and turning it into something to make sure that other people are protected. That is what they are doing. And they are literally, they should be treasured by the country for it. And instead we've got this whole just fake news of scaremongering that the screening programme is going to fail when we have no evidence to believe that. Even
Finally, Danny, what could the HSE do tomorrow that would make you think that they're on the right track?
The first thing they could do is actually go and sort out their mandatory open disclosure policy. They were meant to have revised the policy. It's actually in their policy that if you go through the documents, it's a very long read. So if you ever do it, bring a cup of tea. It does say that it's absolutely the HSE's obligation to disclose major failures in healthcare to the patient. And then a couple of pages later, it says at the discretion of a doctor, but there's absolutely no parameters for the health professional. It's just at their own discretion, which means there's no way to regulate that. And and that's a huge problem. They basically stopped. They were meant to revise it every 2 years, but because of the legislation that passed in the Dáil in 2017, they didn't have to. So the first thing that they could do is go and have a look at that, sort out their mandatory open disclosure policy, so there's not loopholes in it, that it can be adhered to.
Danny McCabe of Standing for Women, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thanks very much, William.
Never miss a show. Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
If you'd like to hear more podcasts from me and more investigations into the institutions of Irish life, I would certainly love to do them, and I could devote more time to them if I got them sponsored. I have a page on Patreon that allows ordinary listeners to donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, whatever you want. So if you think it's valuable, please do that and share the podcast to your friends so they can do the same. Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow @Here'sHowPodcast on Twitter, and follow Standing For Women @StandingForWomen_, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or topic for a future show. Also, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that, including my Patreon link, are at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.